Welcome to the first episode of 3D Paint.
So what printer should you buy? Well, the first printer that I would highly recommend is a standard Ender 3. And there are different variations. That's actually a Disway, and that one at the end is an actual Ender 3, and the one in the middle is actually a Focus. These are FDM printers, which I highly recommend. And the reason why I say go with the Ender 3 out of all of these is because the Ender 3 has a lot of information out there, a lot of parts, a lot of things that will help you keep printing and stay printing with the Ender 3. Opposed to other brands that if you bought, there might not be information out there, you might get stuck on something, and it makes it a little bit more frustrating. Now, when you 3D print an FDM, I want you to picture almost like a hot glue gun, and the hot glue would actually be the plastic running through on a head, and it'd actually be drawing. So that's what an FDM printer actually does. And it does a pretty good job. It's great for large objects, cosplay stuff, but unfortunately, you do get a lot of layer lines, as you can see here, which I'm going to show you how to minimize those once you're done printing. But it does do a good job. Here is an example of a Deadpool. Now you can kind of see there is little things, layer lines, little things that you could see in there, but you can clean them up and use certain paints to make this work. Now when you get smaller, like with this lady Deadpool, it's a small little model, you have to use a layer height of 0.16 millimeter to get that look, but you can see there's layer lines still. And again, you can clean this up with certain types of paint and sanding and some workarounds. You can definitely get this to work out for you. Here we have a resin 3D printer. Smaller build volume, you can get bigger, but they cost more money. This particular model costs you about $250, and as you can see, it's got a pretty small build volume. That's as big as it could build, and that's the height that it can build on. It actually uses stuff called resin, which is photosensitive, and it goes layer by layer again, but because it's liquid, it could do more detail. Here's an example of a Batman, a 3D printed resin Batman. I mean, look at the detail, barely see any layer lines, looks really nice. This is very fragile, unlike the other plastic, which was the FDM printers, but this is almost double the price of FDM printing. So you're talking, let's say the FDM would only cost you less than $1 to do. This would be 3 times more the price for resin. So you're definitely talking more money. So the Ender 3 you can get for around $200 with spools of filament that would last you a very long time for anywhere from $15 to $40 for that spool, opposed to a resin 3D printer, which you're looking at $250, smaller build volume, so you can't build as big, and you're getting a thing of resin, which is 1,000 grams for around $40. So there's 1,000 kilogram spool of filament opposed to a bottle of resin. You're going to get more out of the filament than you are the resin. Now, the good thing about the resin is you can reuse it as the spool of filament. As you use it, that's it. It's gone. The resin, anything you have left over, you can reuse. All right, so you're making a choice of what you want as far as a 3D printer. So I want to give you the best knowledge I could possibly give you. The biggest thing is size. So I have 2 that I primed and that are ready for paint, and I'll be painting them later on in one of these videos. And this is very minimal work that I had to do, and it's a very small print, and this is pretty much the biggest. Could probably do it a little bit bigger on my Elegoo, and they do sell bigger resin printers, but very minimal cleanup. You have to sand down some of the edges where the contact points are. Prints it, you have to clean it, you have to detach all the lines on it, and then you have to put it in a UV box so that way you can cure it, and that way it's fully ready to go, and then you can sand it down a little bit here and there and prime it and paint it. So there is a lot of work that goes into this, but it's minimal compared to is if you were making a bigger 3D print, and this was actually done on the FDM printer, and you can see this is a way bigger print than this one. And for me to get this size print out of like an Elegoo Mars, you'd have to get an Elegoo Saturn, or you'd have to slice this up and make a mess out of it. But if you had an Elegoo Saturn, you could possibly print something this big. It will be almost 3 times the price. It all depends on what detail you want. Now, I will say this took a lot of sanding, and you can still see some layer lines here and there. A lot of effort to get it to this point. I even have a little bit of Bondo on here, some clay filler, and I'll show you techniques that you could use to get that, and some primer filler as well on this to get this to look this smooth. So this is is ready for paint, and I think she came out really great, but it had to be this big. I couldn't really FDM print this. I mean, you could, but it's never going to look the quality of this. So if you're into smaller things, definitely worth investing into a resin 3D printer. So like if you're into game pieces or something like that, or figurines like this size. This is one that I 3D printed, a Hellboy, and I painted this. I really wanted to spend the time and make that really nice and paint that. So to give you an idea of my paint work, that's a Hellboy. And to clean this up did take quite a bit because there was a lot of supports in there, and you could see some of the mess up in the supports, and I'm not afraid to show up my mess ups. I could have went in there and sanded that better, and it's better to get stuff in pieces or put them at a certain different angle. And if you guys want me to talk more about stuff like that, I could do that. And then this is an FDM print, and it's hard to see the layer lines with the paint, but I did primer fill this. I sanded some of this, but underneath his chin you could still see it a little bit right there. But this is what a finished product would look like with FDM. So, you know, there's a lot of give and take there. Ease of use, not using too many harsh chemicals, FDM. I like both of them. It depends on what project I am trying to print. They both have their pros and their cons, things that I like about them, things that I don't like about them. I mean, I'll tell you right off the bat, I love how easy it is to 3D print in FDM. It's just easier. On my Ender 3, I can set it and forget it. I have a Raspberry Pi hooked up to it, and I can send the files over and print that stuff. And there's a lot of support for an Ender 3. I really highly recommend that. It does have drawbacks as far as layer lines, but there are workarounds. As far as tiny prints, I'm gonna say this, and I'm sure there's someone out there that knows how to do smaller prints. You know, if you change the nozzle and you go crazy, you could get smaller prints. But honestly, if you were gonna do small prints, something like this size, I would honestly go with resin. You're not going to get the print quality on a resin printer that you can't get with an FDM. There's no way you can get it this smooth and this detailed, in my opinion, with an FDM. You would have to use resin. So I would highly recommend resin for that particular thing. Making stuff for use or cosplay, I would highly recommend FDM. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps you. You can do other prints. This is just painting that I'm working on right now that I'm using to test out how to film my painted projects. This isn't done, so don't judge me on this, but this was actually done with FDM and just trying to get better angles, get better views, so that way you guys could really see how to paint these things and how to get, you know, detail work in there and learn some of the techniques that I've learned along the way. That's it for the first episode of 3D Paint. I really hope this helps you guys out. I'm gonna have more videos as I have time, and I'll push them out as soon as I can, so consider subscribing.